Good morning. This is Chief Meteorologist and COO of Weather Trends 360, Richard Woolley here. I want to bring you a little update about the spring 2018 farm weather outlook here. Today is the end of March, and finally some of the snow has begun to melt around our parts of the world, and I'm sure many others as well. However, we're not quite done with winter just yet. We have some more winter weather, unfortunately, coming down the pike here for us. Let's take a look back here, though, at the month of March, see how that's been working out for us. March, as we know, has been pretty darn cold across most of the country. Southern Plains has been the one exception, but really most of the Corn Belt's been pretty cold. Into the east, across the Northern Plains, and back into the Northern Rockies, and much of the west has also seen some cold weather this month. Along with the cold, we've seen plenty of snow. We've had quite a bit of snow now this month, running down through the plains with a storm track that kind of comes through the plains. And then through the east, we've had some big nor'easters here in the East Coast with a lot of snow this winter, or at least this month of March. Actually, the winter wasn't so bad, but it's really turned cold here in March. We're also getting very wet conditions across the Ohio Valley, and pull that up here for you. Looking at the overall March precipitation, this is as of through today. We can see some very wet conditions from central Illinois into central Indiana, backwards down here into Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma, northeast Texas. Pretty much most of the Ohio Valley pretty wet. We do see some wetness back across, at least here in the month of March, back across western Iowa and up into the high plains of the Dakotas. We do see one more weather system. Actually, I think it's coming down later today through the next couple days. It's going to roll down through the northern plains, through the Dakotas, Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, into northern Michigan, bringing some snow to folks up there. So really winter's not quite loosening its grip just yet, but we're all getting ready for spring here as we kind of think forward and get prepared for the upcoming growing season. What's going on worldwide right now? Globally, we've been in a La Nina circulation across the tropical Pacific. A La Nina is typically this unusual cold water area that develops to the west of South America, to the east of Australia, along the equator, and we get this cold water anomaly pop up out here. That's what's indicated by this blue shading. And that usually plays some interesting feats with our weather during the wintertime, especially when we have the cold banked up here against the west coast of South America. When we get that cold like that in the winter, we tend to get some pretty cold shots of weather here in the eastern United States during the wintertime. We've seen that from time to time back in early January, December, and again here in March. And with this pattern still pretty much well entrenched across the Pacific, with this La Nina continuing into the spring, we're going to see that kind of weather pattern continue, unfortunately, as we go into April. April is, looking ahead here to the forecast for April, we're still looking at some pretty colder temperatures, colder than normal temperatures across most of the plains, the Corn Belt, pretty much the entire Midwest, over here into parts of the east, maybe not quite all the way to the coast, but pretty close. These colder pattern will continue to bring elevated amounts of rainfall, particularly along the border here on the eastern edge, where we kind of have this battle between cold air to the north and west and warm air to the south and east. We're going to get continued rainfall, and potentially could be fairly heavy rainfall across the Ohio Valley. This is a typical La Nina signal. We often see this during La Nina, or winters that are dominated by La Nina. We'll see a wet period throughout the Ohio Valley, and this year is no different. Looking at the weather forecast for precipitation here in April, again, here's all this moisture here across the Ohio Valley, Tennessee Valley, lower Mississippi Valley, mid-Mississippi Valley, up into the eastern lakes. Pretty overall wet conditions. That even stretches back toward getting back into some of the plains here, getting back into Iowa, Kansas, extreme eastern Kansas, and then up into Wisconsin. There's a little bit of moisture here across the Dakotas down into Minnesota. That might actually be associated more with this snow event coming up over the next few days here. Keeping plenty of rainfall here during the month of April. So basically, a big takeaway here, April, pretty cool, pretty wet, cold soil temperatures, high soil moistures. All of those things are going to lead to more difficulty situation planting. Here's a projection of the soil moisture come mid-April. We're still looking at fairly wet soils throughout most of the Midwest. From Iowa and points eastward will all be wet to fairly wet soils. There is some dryness out here in the high plains, especially the southern high plains from Amarillo up toward Goodland, Kansas is quite dry. They've been dry all winter. They're going to stay fairly dry as we go into spring and into summer. We are definitely seeing some droughty-like conditions forming down here in the south. There are a few dry conditions up here in the north, but not too bad just yet. Not really a big concern at this point. We have pretty good soil moistures as we go into the spring planting season. Now, as we progress into May, we do believe temperatures are going to improve across most of the country. Overall warm up throughout the month of May across pretty much all the growing areas in the middle of the country and the east. A little bit of cool still holding on back up here in the Dakotas and Montana, but not too much. The rest of the growing region looks fairly favorable for warm temperatures. And the other piece of good news is coming out of that cold April and wet April, we're also going to see it dry out here, at least across most of the plains. Maybe not so much the Ohio Valley. They're still going to hold on to a little bit more moisture, but everybody starts to dry out a bit. So we should see field conditions improve, soil temperatures improve. And we should be able to start to see planting rates and germination start to catch back up to normal levels by the time we get through May. So it's going to be a little bit of a fear as we come out of April that the cold, wet weather has delayed things, and that might drive prices up temporarily. But as we go through May and the warmer, drier weather allows everybody to get out and start working the fields, we do see that condition kind of returning back toward normal. Taking a quick look here at the overall summer. Here we have a depiction of temperature for the overall summer. Yellow is indicating a bit warmer than normal. Blue's a little cooler than normal. You can see there's not a lot of blue on the map here. Overall, we do depict a generally normal to maybe slightly warmer than normal summer. You have to be a little bit careful. This warmth down here in the southern plains is more early season oriented, so maybe more like May, June into early July. Looks pretty hot across the southern plains. The heat really doesn't get going up here in the north until later into July, and then August looks pretty warm. So kind of a late summer warmth up here across the Midwest. This warmth in the southern plains is more early to midsummer. July could be pretty hot down here in places like Amarillo, Oklahoma City. I think it could be pretty hot weather here in July. But that'll start to fade in August as we get some moisture to at least start to help these guys down here. The moisture will be helpful, but it will not impact the drought conditions that we're seeing out here in the southern high plains. While we do get moisture in the summer, it's often sporadic, thunderstorm related, so they're just not going to get enough during the summer months to really alleviate that drought condition that they're seeing down here. The rest of the areas of summer, like I said, we're going into summer pretty good, but the thing we got to watch for is developing dryness across these areas that are also going to start to become warmer and warmer. So kind of, it's the old warmer and drier begets warm and drier. So as we start to warm up here, we're also going to start to dry out, and that's going to kind of continue right on into August. Matter of fact, it may kind of peak in August, where we get our warmest and driest weeks of the year sometime during the month of August. You can see overall we have drier conditions across the upper Midwest for the whole summer. Again, this is late summer related. It's not so much early in the summer. And then we see some rainfall down here in the southern plains, but that's more late summer as well. It's not going to be very helpful to the drought conditions we're seeing down there right now. Ohio Valley still looks fairly wet through the summer into the east, so we really don't see any big drought conditions developing further east. This area up here in northern plains, we got to watch this. This is right through the sweet spot in the Corn Belt, the highest producing soils. We'll see a bit of a drier than normal summer for rainfall, particularly as we go into July and August. I think May and June is going to be somewhat okay here, and plus we have good carryover soil moisture in some of these regions from the winter. We're going to get some more snow up here as well, which is going to help alleviate some of this, at least early in the growing season. Now later in the season we may have some issues with things starting to dry out up in here and getting some desiccation and shutting down of plant growth a little earlier than would be expected. One of the other things to kind of keep in the back of our mind here is with the warm summer, one of the things we're also looking at is actually a flip back to a potentially colder September, especially in the Midwest. Now, most years that would be a big situation, but this year we've seen years in past in La Nina dominated summers that when you do get this colder trend in the upper Midwest, this can also be associated with an opportunity for a early fall frost. Possibly 1 to 2 weeks earlier than normal, I would say, anywhere from Bismarck down through Minneapolis, possibly as far south as Des Moines, over into Wisconsin, lower Michigan, and that risk of frost maybe not so much Ohio, but could also include some areas here in the interior Northeast, which could also be a bit colder than would be expected with an early frost, potentially 1 to 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Now, in the east here, our first frost is typically mid-October. Up here in the northern plains, it's anywhere from basically October 1st back into that last week of September. So maybe a week or two earlier than normal for getting your first frost up here in the northern growing regions. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we progress through the summer here and the progress of your crop, that there could be a shortening of the season across the northern plains here in late September. So let's just keep that in the back of our heads. So really a couple of highlights here just to give you kind of a summary. Cold weather is going to continue well into April with wet weather, especially across the eastern half of the growing regions, resulting in cold soil temperatures and excessive moisture, especially again in the east. That's going to lead to a delay in planting, delay in germination, and all the problems that go with being too cold and too wet in late April. We do believe the more favorable weather starts to arrive very late April going into May. All of May looks to be better conditions overall with warmer and drier pretty much for everybody. Planting and germination should catch back up to normal levels. So after a bit of a scare, it should things should get back to where we expect it to be by end of May. Summer again looks overall to be favorable, not too hot, not too dry, but we will start to see heat and dryness building as the summer progresses. So first we're going to see it in the western and southern high plains, and then it spreads eastward later in the summer as we get into late July, and then again through much of August. One thing to point out, and I pointed that out earlier when we were looking at the map, was that late summer dryness is also quite notable because it's in the plains, basically over some of the strongest and the most fertile ground for corn production areas. So we might start to see a little bit of drought stress in the corns as we get into August across southern Minnesota and northeastern Iowa. Maybe also tracking down into northwestern Indiana there, but probably not too bad. The other thing to watch out for here is that risk of an early season frost, 1 to 2 weeks, possibly earlier than normal, across parts of the upper Midwest, and also add in there the interior New England. So for any fruit growers that are over into the New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania area, you might want to keep that in mind as well. Anyway, that's kind of the outlook for the spring summer here of 2018. I'm Weather Trends meteorologist Richard Woolley. We're going to hand it off to Bill Fordham and have a little discussion here right following this about the upcoming about potential for growing prices and what he sees as potential for going on this year.
As the colder than normal April unfolds in the Midwest over the next few weeks, the trade will become more sensitive to the potential for negative impacts on both corn acres and production. However, I doubt if it will have a significant impact on corn prices until we get into the month of May and we see how conditions develop. The next major price event will be looking for the spring high. The average date for the spring high in December corn is April 9th and April 3rd for November soybeans. If prices are unable to exceed today's highs in the weeks ahead, we may have already set the spring high. The less than expected prospective planted acres for both corn and soybeans, coupled with the negative production experience the trade has seen in Argentina this winter, will likely increase the market sensitivity to potential negative weather impacts in the months ahead. Corn has the potential to use more than what will be produced both here in the U.S. and the world in the 18-19 marketing year. Get 25 to 40% of your projected production priced above the 400 level in December 2018 corn futures. The proposed fundamentals in soybeans aren't quite as strong as for corn right now, but the spec money almost always likes the soybean market first and foremost if inflation is ever a potential. Get 25 to 40% of your projected production priced above the 1020 level in November 2018 soybean futures.